The United States seized Nicolás Maduro directly in his bed during a Nochnoy raid. In Caracas, a series of powerful explosions occurred, leaving part of the city without electricity. Parliament, military bases, ports, and a military academy were hit. Washington accuses Maduro of terrorism, and Trump personally monitored the operation live. Venezuelan authorities are calling for resistance. The defense minister speaks of the beginning of aggression, while the vice president demands proof that Maduro is alive. The country is on the brink of a split. Some take to the streets to defend the regime, others celebrate the fall of the dictatorship. The world reacts sharply. Cuba and Iran condemn the United States. China demands the immediate release of Maduro. Russia speaks of an invasion. Europe has stepped aside but is watching closely. And in the streets of Chile, jubilant Venezuelans wave flags. What lies behind this operation? Will there be war? And who now controls Venezuela? Now, in order. They were taken while sleeping, without a single shot. According to American authorities, Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were detained at night in their own home, in the bedroom. When the operation began, they were still asleep. Special forces were used. Fast, silent, without losses. As the Pentagon says, clean. United States President Donald Trump was the first to report this on his social network. He emphasized that the operation was carried out successfully, without losses. Maduro and his wife are already outside Venezuela, under United States control. Later, Trump stated that he would personally appear at a press conference at 11 in the morning, Mar-a-Lago time. But the real details began to emerge not from press releases, but from Trump's own live broadcast. In an interview with Fox News, he admitted that he watched the operation in real time, with the command staff, with generals. According to him, a huge number of aircraft and helicopters were involved in the operation, including fighter jets for any possible scenario. Trump says, "I saw everything, how they opened steel doors in seconds, how the guys on the ground worked. It was incredible. Not a single death, only wounded, but everything was under control." He compares this operation with others he was involved in Iran and in Afghanistan. But he emphasizes, "I have never seen this level before." According to CNN sources, the charges against Maduro are serious. Conspiracy to commit narco-terrorism, cocaine trafficking, illegal possession of weapons, conspiracy against the United States. All cases have been transferred to American jurisdiction. The trial will take place on United States territory. At around 2 in the morning local time, the first explosions were heard over Caracas. In the sky, the noise of low-flying fighter jets. People ran into the streets, electricity was cut off. Within an hour, no fewer than 7 airstrikes were recorded across the city. The targets were not random. The Venezuelan parliament, the residence of the defense minister, the Francisco de Miranda military air base, as well as the major naval base of La Guaira in Vargas State were hit. Explosions were also heard on Margarita Island, a key point of the country's military logistics in the Caribbean Sea. Fort Tiuna, a stronghold of the defense forces, was also attacked. The southern districts of Caracas were swept by a wave of panic. Hundreds of cars attempted to leave the city. Internet and mobile communications were intermittent. The city plunged into chaos. People hid in basements. Crowds panicked in the streets. Several hours after the raid, the government introduced a state of emergency. On state television channels, a statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was read out. It stated directly that the goal of the United States was control over Venezuela's strategic resources: oil, minerals, ports, and most importantly, Venezuela reserves the right to self-defense. The references were to the Charter of the United Nations. Words were spoken about a violation of sovereignty, direct aggression, and a threat to the entire region, but there was no panic in the tone, only mobilization. At that moment, no one had officially confirmed that Maduro had been captured. The country lived in a state of information overload. In the streets, confusion. On television, calls for unity. Several hours after the strikes, a video address by Venezuela's Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino, appeared on state television. He spoke in uniform, against a backdrop of flags, and spoke not like an official, but like a wartime commander. Venezuela has become the target of criminal military aggression. Missiles and helicopter strikes have been used against us. We are gathering data on the dead and wounded. This is a direct attack on peaceful areas, on the people, on sovereignty. His speech was clear and harsh. It was announced that a full-scale deployment of all military resources had begun, from naval to missile systems. The army was placed on full combat readiness. Next, the country's vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, went on air. She said something different. Her main message was this: "It is unknown where the president is. It is unknown whether he is alive." She demanded immediate confirmation from Washington of what had happened to Maduro and his wife. "We demand compliance with international law. We demand that the United States immediately show what has happened to our president President, we condemn this act of violence, this terrorism, and we know that behind it are attempts to seize our oil, destroy the country, and subordinate it to Chujoy will. Rodriguez herself is an ambiguous figure. In the past, she had declared readiness for dialogue with the United States. She even supported the inclusion of a drug cartel on the list of terrorist organizations. But now, she's one of those holding the political field inside the country. Later, Diosdado Cabello appears on camera, the Minister of the Interior, a man with great influence. He is wearing body armor and a helmet. He stands before the camera and speaks simply. Remain calm. Do not give in to fear. Obey the army. This is an attempt to show that power has not collapsed, that there is still order within the system. He does not pronounce Maduro's surname, but his entire speech is defensive. It is the voice of a regime that understands that the front line now runs not beyond the country's borders, but within them. Nicolás Maduro was always presented as a man of the people, and at first, people believed it. Born into a large family, he grew up in working-class neighborhoods of Caracas, without elite universities. He worked as a city bus driver. Through the trade union, he entered politics. There he was noticed by Hugo Chavez, who made him his associate and later his successor. After Chavez's death in the year 2013, Maduro became president. He inherited a country with colossal oil revenues, but also with an enormous dependence on that same oil. Instead of developing the economy, the money went to subsidies, benefits, and gifts to the people. This worked as long as oil prices remained high, but when prices collapsed, the decline began. Against the backdrop of American sanctions, the economy simply fell apart. Oil production dropped by almost 10 times. Inflation spiraled out of control. Shops emptied. People stood in lines for bread and fuel. The currency was losing value literally every week. A mass exodus from the country began. According to the United Nations, nearly 8 million people left Venezuela. This is the largest migration crisis in the modern history of Latin America. But Maduro's power held on. Through the security forces, through the army, through alliances with Cuba, China, and Russia, protests were suppressed, harshly. With arrest, batons, sometimes with the use of firearms. Loyal courts, controlled media, intimidated opposition figures. The system held because everything was under control. Formally, the law. In reality, fear. In the year 2024, he won the elections again. Officially, 51% of the vote. The opposition and part of the international community did not recognize the results. But Maduro remained. And in the eyes of many who lived under this regime, hope faded with each passing year, until one night changed everything. In the morning, when it became clear that the strikes had hit across the entire country and that Maduro had indeed disappeared, the streets of Venezuela began to speak, some quietly, in telegram channels and behind closed doors, others openly, live on air. Some hope that this is the beginning of the end, that the fall of the regime will finally bring change. 28 years of Chavez and Maduro, that is an entire era. Many young people do not remember any other power. Now, after rockets thundered over Caracas, they say, it's time to change everything. We waited for this day. We no longer want to live in fear. Our country was stolen from us, and now it is coming back, says one of the participants at a rally in Valencia. She has the Venezuelan flag and tears on her face. But there are other voices as well. People who do not trust the United States, who do not believe in liberation. They see what is happening as aggression, an invasion, humiliation. Yes, Maduro is no gift, but he is our president. It is not for them to decide whom we should overthrow, says a man standing near a damaged building in Caracas. Part of society is mobilizing at the call of the authorities. The army and militias are gathering volunteers. Recruitment is underway across the country. Some join out of conviction, others out of fear. But mobilization is ongoing, and beyond the country's borders, a completely different picture. On the streets of Santiago, the capital of Chile, there is dancing. Venezuelans who fled the regime are celebrating. They wave flags, they shout, "Freedom! Maduro has fallen! Now we have a chance!" For them, this is not a military operation, it is liberation. It is the end of a long and painful history of exile. I feel that I can return home after so many years. Today is the day of freedom, says a woman who arrived in Chile 5 years ago. Such scenes are repeating in Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. Everywhere that millions of Venezuelans who fled hunger, repression, and poverty have settled. And now, two worlds, those who stayed and those who fled, are looking at each other again. One with anxiety, the other with hope. Havana was the first to react. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel called the actions of the United States a criminal attack. A direct quote, "Our zone of peace is under brutal assault. Homeland or death, we shall overcome." For Cuba, Venezuela is not just a neighbor, it is a key partner. Without cheap oil from Caracas, Havana itself barely stays afloat. Colombia is another front. President Gustavo Petro is calling for the immediate convening of the Security Council of the United Nations. He says a new wave of escalation must not be allowed. And at the same time, he is deploying law enforcement forces along the border, because the flow of refugees is no longer a humanitarian issue but a political one. A harsh statement comes from Iran. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Islamic Republic of Iran directly accuses Washington of violating international law and the Charter of the United Nations. The word aggression is used, and not only in relation to Venezuela, but to the entire world order. This is already a global challenge. China remained silent for a long time, but when it was confirmed that Maduro was indeed in the United States, the reaction was immediate. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China stated, "We are deeply shocked and resolutely condemn this." There are no diplomatic caveats in the statement. It directly refers to the hegemonic actions of the United States, which threaten the stability of Latin America and violate international law. Russia responds in a firm tone, but with restraint. First, concern, then open support for Venezuelan sovereignty. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation demands the immediate release of Maduro. It is stated that Moscow is in constant contact with Caracas. It is emphasized, "We will not allow a military solution in Latin America. This region is a zone of peace." The European Union is split. Kaja Kallas, head of the European Union's Foreign Policy Service, states that Maduro lacks legitimacy. However, she calls for restraint. The main message is that the safety of European Union citizens in Venezuela is a priority, but there is no support for the operation from Europe, neither direct nor indirect. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom also distanced himself. In his statement, he said that London was not involved in the operation and that further actions would depend on how events unfold. All of this is the positioning of pieces on a new chessboard. The game has only just begun. What comes next? Venezuela without a president, streets filled with smoke, an army that will either be mobilized or is already being held at gunpoint, chaos in the capital, applause and condemnation abroad. The opposition is silent or waiting. The moment it has waited for years has arrived, but is it ready to take the country into its hands if Maduro truly disappears from the political scene? The system he built over decades may resist for a long time, or it may collapse within a single day. Everything depends on the next step, not statements, but actions. Who will step up to the microphone? Who will enter the palace? Who will ultimately take the country? The window has opened, but beyond it, uncertainty.